Morning. It's good to be here with you all today, even if virtually. I'll make a quick note that the sermon I'll be delivering is actually from a larger book project I'm working on the Psalms, parenthood, and climate change. This is from a chapter I've adapted for you all. So I took a course in college on film that completely changed how I look at the movies. While I've been watching films my whole life, that class helped me see entirely new dimensions. The professor slowed things down and moved deliberately. Professor Fisdale would pause the movie and ask questions about composition like, what does it mean that this scene was shot in a way where she looks small? Or, why is this flag in the foreground? We would rewatch scenes several times and he would ask us to think about why a scene of one character's failure was followed by a scene about another character's supposed success. The buttons on the remote served as imperatives that demanded our attention and action. Stop. Pause. Rewind. Now, playing in the backyard or the park with my son is not unlike this course, as Teddy's taught me to see dimensions of the world that I largely ignore or have forgotten. He usually does not speak in abstractions about the beauty of the earth. He mostly speaks in imperatives. Look at the leaves on that tree. They all have brown tips. Lift up this rock. I want to see if there are any centipedes under it. Stop. Look at those ants. I wonder what they're doing. His deliberate and patient lessons in the backyard, when I'm disciplined enough to follow them, provide a practice embedded in a relationship of love and care that is profoundly reorienting. Now, sometimes I am able to join him in this collaborative work. I might introduce him to one of our fellow creatures. This one is called a walnut tree. That one is a paper tree. I might invite him to join me on the grass in one of those brief moments of spring in Kentucky before the mosquitoes would punish such leisure, and direct him to close his eyes and tell me what he hears. We might gaze up at the clouds together and look for shapes. These little lessons help me to look at the creation that surrounds me with joy and wonder. As Gary Paul Nabon notes, while some adults are apt to look for nature in picturesque vistas that are far away, children tend to look down at what is close and small. In a similarly instructive manner, environmental justice movements speak of our environment as the places where we work, live, and play. Children, like justice movements, redirect our attention from nature being something that is way out there, pristine and pure, to that which is right under our noses, beneath our feet, and in our own backyard. Now, some of this is difficult to look at because it is broken or even ostensibly boring. We often don't stop to smell the flowers because we are too busy, and I would wager because we want to remain distracted. There's so much pain and brokenness in the world that it can make it hard to slow down and really pay attention. I spend much of my time and energy thinking about and trying to activate people on issues related to the ecological crisis. And my sense is that most people avoid thinking about these issues, not because they don't care, but because they care too much. And so my suspicion is that people think that these issues are sort of like a black hole. If you get too close, you'll get caught in an inescapable dark despair. My conviction, however, is that the opposite is actually the case. The path to really attending to creation and the tasks of healing is actually one marked by joy. But we have to follow our children's lead to discover the alternative energy, the power of God's creation that surrounds us. Children can help us see with curious and hopeful eyes. Our kids help us see the wonder and beauty and resilience and strength and life buzzing and blooming in our midst. We need to be able to see this power flowing through creation and our common life if we're going to participate in the healing and transformation demanded by the ecological crisis. When I'm able to listen to his stark imperatives, I find that Teddy can be my teacher, as he directs me to stop, pause, look again. Now, the poetry and prayer of the Psalms can also take us by the hands and teach us to see the joy of creation. Psalm 100 does just this, though it's a bit more focused on helping us hear. It begins singing, "Make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth." This imperative is not just addressed to us, but to everyone and everything. The psalm both calls for and directs us to the joyful noise that surrounds us. On several occasions, Teddy has responded to the bird song that fills the evening air, wondering what they are singing about. My best and most frequent response is that they are singing praises to their Creator. Likewise, my son has paused before and observed that the wind blowing through the leaves and the trees sounds like clapping. Now, the psalm echoes this insight and calls on us to see creation as a choir, to contribute our part. Like my son in the backyard saying, "Help me reach this branch," Psalm 100 speaks to us mostly in imperatives. It calls on us to worship the Lord with gladness, come into his presence with singing. We have to take time in our relationships and in our bodies to slow down, to be open to the presence of God and to sing praises. These are practices whereby we serve the Lord and are transformed. Now, because the accounting schemes of our culture have devalued these kinds of action, the imperatives at the heart of this psalm might seem private or even ephemeral. But there is something earthy and earthly involved in the imperative to worship. Now, the Hebrew word translated here as worship, abad, is the same used in the second creation story when the Lord gives humanity their vocation by placing Adam in the garden to till, Hebrew word abad, and keep it. So worship and till, same word. The term carries a deep sense of service and has a more holistic, everyday, and even political valence. We can hear this in Jesus' counsel that you cannot serve God and money, or mammon. Can't serve God and money. James Mays notes that in the Exodus tradition, serving, abad, a Hebrew word, so serving God is drawn in contrast to serving Pharaoh. To serve God is to exit the pyramidal structure of the empire and to head into the wilderness and a different way of life. So to try and knot some of this together, since I just went off on a little bit of a self-indulgent jaunt talking about a Hebrew term, and it's not like I even really know biblical Hebrew. So when the psalm says worship the Lord with gladness, the term worship is something big and integrated in with what animates our lives. So the psalm is giving us the imperative, the direction, like a teacher or a child, to serve the Lord with gladness. And calling us into the joyful singing with creation, the psalm is directing us in ways that are practical, powerful, and countercultural. The pharaohs and managers of the world will only ever see this as wasted time or something that's personal. But one of the ways that we till the garden that is the earth, right, that we abide, that we serve it, that we serve God rather than money or the empire, is singing with gladness. This is practical and political wisdom. Now, these imperatives from the psalm mark a path that help us to respond to the next charge of the psalm, to know that the Lord is God. This imperative is a centerpiece of the poem. It's the fourth and therefore the middle of its 7 imperatives. It serves as a hinge. And this lets us know that the other imperatives show us how to come to know God in this way. We make a joyful noise. We serve with gladness. We come into God's presence with song. We do not know a God that only exists in our minds, or by worshiping God in a compartmentalized and privatized holy space in the holy time at the holy day. Right? We know God when we have turned away from empire and serve God by following God's wilderness ways. Now the verse continues and underlines the divine character as creator, shepherd. These rich images bring our attention down into spaces that are rooted and grounded. The Psalter declares that it is God that made us, and we are God's. We are God's people and the sheep of God's pasture. This God is not abstract or aloof. The God who creates is not a watchmaker that exits seen right. Rather, as the preponderance of possessive articles makes clear, we are God's. We are God's people. Our relationship is thick and central. We relate to God as sheep to a shepherd. This is a relationship of care that concerns our sustenance, our security, and our entire way of life. To follow and serve this God, we should look to spaces of care and creation and joy. This is not achieved through passive or disinterested looking, but these actions are done with others, all kinds of creatures, and all of the earth. The psalm gives us specific practices: making a joyful noise, worshiping, serving, singing, knowing, giving thanks, all of which can help us see beyond the ways that the empire has reduced our habitats to being natural resources, or our lawns to being managed, or the commonwealth to being real estate. Christ counseled and instructive imperatives that we might look to the lilies of the field and consider the birds of the air for these teachings. Perhaps we would do well to listen to the teachings of children and attend more closely to the places where we work, live, and play. Perhaps part of our calling is to become more like them to enter the kingdom, the cooperative commonwealth of God. The psalm teaches us with simple imperatives: stop, pause, read again with joy. Now, on the occasions when I'm able to follow my son's lead and really attend to the creation under my nose in the backyard, something magical happens. I'm able to travel back in time. Echoing behind my son's laughter, I can hear echoes of my childhood. When I see Teddy digging in the dirt, it's as though I'm looking at a palimpsest. My own infantile scrawlings in the soil are layered on top of his. These moments of wonder often help me to connect with a past that typically feels lost. And this not only opens capacities for wonder and joy in my own heart, but it seems to move outward as I can better discern the ways that all the earth makes a joyful noise. Now, this trick of time travel is a bit easier for me because we live in the house where I grew up. The yard has changed a good deal. The redbud tree I used to climb, the apple tree that was in the middle of the yard, and the thicket of honeysuckle that marked its entire south side are all gone. Yet an abundance of fecund connections remain. These memories are often a conduit to joyful wonder. But they also often reveal the real losses that have occurred in the ensuing decades. When I was a kid, the 4.5-acre lot behind ours was an open field with a thicket of trees in the middle of town. It was a set of many childhood adventures. Now this lot is crammed full of townhouses and a small gated community. The carbon capturing trees are gone, the life-giving topsoil is lost, and the impermeable surfaces of roofs and asphalt cause a yard down the street to flood regularly. This is a loss that is representative of so much of God's good creation, which has now been so scarred and desecrated that our global climate has been disrupted. This loss has been driven by systems that seek to privatize profits for the few at the expense of the many. One day, when I'm attuned to the lesson my son is leading, and he asks me to lift up a large stone so that he can look under it, I really see the rich, loamy soil that is revealed underneath. The roly-poly bugs and ants that skitter around seem to be dancing. This buzzing and beautiful life overflows beyond this moment and opens up memories. The last line of Psalm 100 comes to mind: "For the Lord is good, his steadfast love endures forever, and his faithfulness to all generations." I try to hold on to this insight, to the joyful noise of the beauty of creation and the goodness and love of the Creator. But the last line strikes me. God is faithful to all generations, but how faithful have we been to God? What is being handed on to my son's generation? What will the effects of all the changes to this watershed, to say nothing of the global climate, be by the time he is my age? What of the generations yet to come? Part of me wants to stuff these questions down and not to ruin the moment. But I remember that joy is not the same as happiness. Our joyful noises come not just from positive feelings, but also from practices of faith, hope, and love in the face of fear, regret, and loss. To serve God, to live up to our vocation to till, that word abad, to serve the soil in God's good creation, to live up to this vocation, we need to turn our attention to the places where we work, live, and play. The heart of this work, the practices of singing and praise. By cultivating joy and wonder in our hearts and our relationships, we can tap into the power that animates our world. Perhaps we could learn from this joy, not just to see it as a fleeting personal emotion. Perhaps we could see these moments of worship not as a way to fill up our tanks as we return to our workaday world. Perhaps these moments could become lessons that reorient us to look at the world, to relate to others, to act in God's good creation differently. Perhaps it will provide us with an opening to value things other than efficiency and productivity. Perhaps it will allow us to see our time and our spaces as something other than investments, something other than natural and human resources. Perhaps it will give us a time in our lives when we can stop trying to force measured outcomes that are centered on profit, growth, and success. Perhaps our children, the Psalms, worship, and creation are constantly offering us lessons to see another dimension of our lives. And if we start to move in and through this extra dimension, we will find ways to more fully connect with one another and heal our communities and the earth. Perhaps learning to hear the chorus of creation and to sing with childish joy is part of the condition to serve God rather than money, to work for justice and repair the damage that we have done to the earth. I try to remember the lessons of my son and the imperatives of this song. Stop, pause, look to the past, think of the future, sing with joy.